Hey friends, welcome back to my channel. It is so good to have you here. We're continuing the Know Your Worth series, but taking a tangent to Know Your Rights. I did not want to make this video. But since starting the Know Your Worth series, my inbox has been flooded with absolute horror stories of hellish experiences our ServiceNow brothers and sisters are going through. These people found themselves in extremely overreaching contracts and have suffered dire financial damage by not being able to work. Some people not for 2 years. So I made this video so you don't fall victim to the kinds of predatory and abusive contracts that are ruining the lives of our peers. First, a warning. The information presented here is opinion, and you should not interpret it as legal counsel. Contract law differs from country to country and state to state, so you're responsible for understanding the laws where you live. And you are also responsible for your own actions. To help you understand your value and your rights, I reached out to a lawyer friend of mine, and he's agreed to spend some time with us. He's available for legal consultations, so check out the description below. We'll also be hosting a Q&A session in a few weeks, so if you want more information about that, please join my mailing list, and that's also in the description below. Now, let's talk contract law and self-advocacy with my very special guest, Kevin Comer.
Good evening to everyone. I'm Kevin Comer. I'm a lawyer who works in the fields of employment law, contract law, civil litigation, and bankruptcy. I have law degrees from universities in the United States and the Netherlands, and have worked in Amsterdam, Shanghai, and London, in addition to the United States. I'm currently located in Florida. I have extensive experience working with employment law issues and with the tech industry. I currently have clients throughout the United States and the world.
The first topic I want to talk about, Kevin, is non-competes. It seems to be a controversial kind of contract type, and having been screwed over on a non-compete before, I always kind of make sure I have my eyes open to what I'm signing. And the horror stories people have been emailing me over the past few weeks, at least in my non-legal opinion, they seem very, they just sound like shit contracts, to tell you the truth. How do you know if you're looking at a bad non-compete?
Non-competes are very common in the tech world, as you know. One thing I want to point out that is there are different agreements that people sign. Sometimes people in the tech industry will sign things like non-disclosure agreements or confidentiality agreements or trade secret clauses. Those are not non-compete clauses. So we're speaking specifically about non-compete clauses here. Your typical non-compete clause will essentially say something along the lines of, you can't work once you leave the company you're working at. You can't work for a specific length of time or for this competitor or in this geographic area. A bad non-compete, which unfortunately we see all the time, and that if you challenge it in court, will likely not be upheld. It wouldn't normally be longer than 6 months or for more than, say, a 50 or 75 mile radius geographically. Or if it includes competitors, it would only include a handful of major competitors. A few years ago, there was an issue with a non-compete clause that Jimmy John's made their sandwich makers sign that stopped them from working at Subways for a year after they quit at Jimmy John's. So there's definitely a lot of nonsense going on about non-compete clauses right now, but they're definitely, in reality, extremely limited in the scope that they can enforce on you.
And this is generally true throughout the United States?
It can depend on the exact state you're in. The obvious example is California, where non-compete clauses are essentially banned. You have to be an extremely important key guy. A phrase that comes up a lot in the litigation about this is a key guy, an extremely major figure in California to have a non-compete clause even begin to be effective against you. But in most states, you can get a basic non-compete effective as long as it has a reasonable amount of time, reasonable geographic duration, and is reasonable in the scope of who it affects. Like, for instance, what competitors you can go and work with. So while it does depend on the state, in essentially every state, there are severe limits that the courts will actually put on the enforceability of non-compete contracts.
Mm-hmm. So do they need those three factors together, or is it kind of any of those three? Like it could be a broader geography, but a shorter amount of time, or do the three come together?
The three normally come together, but the amount of time is the key point. So if you had, for instance, a 3-month non-compete clause and it was 150 miles in geographic scope, that would be more likely to be enforced than 6 months and 150 miles. The geographic radius and the competitors you can't work for is more incidental. If you're going to focus on what's wrong with a non-compete when you're looking at it, if it's in a contract that you've been given, the single most important thing to look at is the duration, the amount of time that it actually lasts. I would say that's 80% of the issues that come up in non-compete clauses is someone signed one and they didn't read it closely and suddenly it's for 2 years.
That's kind of on the shorter end of what I've been hearing from my sources telling me how bad they've been screwed over. Let's say there was a company that was giving me a non-compete and it was kind of either a global or a national level company. Is it within their rights to say, like, you can't work in any state, like you just can't work in this space for 6 months or a year?
That would be virtually impossible to enforce in the court system. I mean, they can get you to sign something. And if I hate to say, if someone is foolish enough to sign an agreement to that effect, they can attempt to enforce it against you. But the chances of, say, a nationwide non-compete clause, there is essentially zero possibility of that being enforced against virtually any individual who would sign it.
You'd have to play to win in court, and you probably would win. You're just going through that drama to declare victory, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
And one of the things we can talk about later is how a court case would actually pan out.
Mm-hmm.
But in almost all cases that I've seen of non-compete clauses in the tech industry that tech engineers and major figures in the tech industry sign, any court, once it gets down to the point where a court is actually going to issue a ruling, the court is not going to uphold it.
So just to remind our listeners, those three things are the duration, the geographic area, and specific competitors within the space.
Exactly.
So a lot of people think that they get this contract in front of them. Maybe they're new in the industry, or maybe they just don't have a lot of negotiation savvy. Is your only option signing? And this goes for non-competes or any other non-disclosures, employment contracts. Is the expectation that you sign whatever they give you?
I think that's the approach that a lot of people take, but especially in a hot industry like tech, that is absolutely the wrong approach to take. Your typical tech engineer, especially now, can easily get other job offers, and it's hard to get qualified personnel. Everything in your contract is up for negotiation. Salary, every fringe benefit, everything should be up for negotiation. Just don't accept whatever you're given. Especially in terms of a non-compete clause, I would argue that you should never accept a non-compete clause. That should never be in any contract you sign. If the company insists on it as a condition of employment, you need to get extremely specific on what you are getting in return for that in case it ever becomes an issue. The most basic thing is that you would need to get a severance package for the length of the non-compete clause.
Is everybody listening to that? Say it again, Kevin. I think that bears repeating.
You need to get a severance package for the length of the non-compete clause that deals with your pay, your benefits, etc. Say you sign a non-compete clause for a year. A court would probably not uphold that. But if you're willing to do that, and you can get a severance package for that full year that pays you, that covers your benefits, that takes care of you, maybe that's worth it. You can put anything in a contract you want so long as it's legal. If you are willing to sign, a 12-month, 18-month non-compete clause, make sure that you get a severance package that covers that entire period. Because if you don't, then you're going to be taking the trouble of challenging the non-compete clause without having any income.
I'm going to take a moment here. I'm going to try not to swear as I do it. Folks, the nightmare stories that are coming into my inbox since I started this Know Your Worth series are horrifying. We are in one of the hottest tech markets in tech. And in our space, there are people who are one check away from homelessness. There are people who for over a year have taken jobs at gas stations, driving Uber and Lyft, and working 18-hour days to get by because they got locked into these fucking horrible non-compete contracts, okay? Don't be a victim here. follow Kevin's advice. If they're going to put some kind of like nonsensical bullshit time limit on your non-compete, make sure you're covered. Go for that severance package. You deserve it. They're literally telling you, some of these contracts, you're not allowed to work anywhere for anyone for 2 years. What are you supposed to do?
Exactly. And this is a problem I've seen. It's a problem Rob has seen. This is becoming a huge issue. Even in the current market, it's a huge issue.
All right, that was great advice, and hopefully worth the listen up to this point just on its own. I hadn't even thought about that, so thank you so much for bringing that to our attention.
A lot of people, when they walk into a job interview, that can be a very stressful situation for people. And especially if you're looking for a job, people have the assumption that the employer has all the power. That is not true in this industry at all. First of all, and I cannot emphasize this too much, if you are offered a contract, never sign it that day. Always take it home with you and think about it. Read through it. Understand what's going on. If you don't understand it, talk to one of your friends about it. If you want to be really careful, tell them you're going to need a few days and hire a lawyer to read it and give you advice on it. But the absolute worst thing someone can do is walk into HR, who are not your friends, who are never going to be your friends, and get bounced into signing a contract. If you take anything from this talk, never walk into HR when you're looking for a job and walk out having signed a contract. Never do that. That is never a good thing to do.
All right, so we talked about putting some wait time between receiving the contract and signing the contract. We talked about everything is negotiable. We talked about severance packages because they're essentially telling you that you're not allowed to work afterwards. Is there anything else where you would say somebody should negotiate?
You can negotiate any part of your compensation. You can negotiate the salary. You can negotiate extra insurance. You can negotiate working from home. A big thing that I think people absolutely ought to negotiate, which I virtually never see, is the use of patents and ideas that you come up with while working for a company. Who has long-term control of that? It's not necessarily the company. There's no law that says the company has control of those patents and those ideas. If you write it into your contract that you have long-term control, you have long-term control. That is absolutely something that can be negotiated and that very few people in the tech industry even know that they can negotiate.
Yep, and this one, for those of you who might still be kind of afraid to do it, this one in particular I've done numerous times. I just send it back to legal. I'm like, you got to redline this. I'm solving problems for you, and I'm going to take the solutions to other people who have those problems. And I have had one client to say, nope, this is absolutely ours and you can't do anything about it and we'll go find somebody else. But most of the time they come back and say, sure, whatever.
And I think that's an extremely important point. Your typical HR department, your typical legal department, they don't care. They don't understand the importance of a lot of these issues. You would be shocked at some of the things you can negotiate and get through with them. They simply don't understand the implications of some of the things that are in these contracts. Normally, it's not someone from the legal department who's going through it with a fine-tooth comb. It's someone from HR. It's a generalist who's looking to onboard employees, and they don't know a lot of these issues. So if you can get them to take things out of a contract, to put things into a contract, you can end up very far ahead.
That's some great insight. I never would have thought of that myself. So do these HR reps have the authority to do the legal red lines?
They often do.
Another topic from the horror stories that are getting mailed to me, like I can't believe people told me that they got to the point where they were fired from whatever organizations they had these absurd non-competes tied to. But on being fired, they were told you have to sign this other document, whether it's a non-disclosure or something, imposing a new contractual limitation. Now, in my own fights with a non-compete in my 20s, I had a lawyer that said, there has to be quid pro quo. You can't be forced to sign a new document unless you're getting something out of it yourself. Is that still sound advice?
Absolutely. A company, especially when you're leaving, they can't make you sign anything. They can't lock the door and not let you out. It's extremely common for companies to attempt to force people to sign these contracts. Again, this goes back to something we discussed before. Never sign one of these contracts until you take it home and look at it, read it, get a lawyer to review it. You should never, in any situation, whether you're coming into a company or leaving a company, just sign something that HR gives you. That's the absolute worst thing you can do. If they want you to sign some sort of non-disclosure agreement, if they want you to sign that sort of thing, you absolutely have a right to negotiate it. Say, I will sign this if you give me this severance package. If you negotiate a severance package for signing something like that, that's fine.
But they can't, and I know shadier people, and let's be clear, those people are out there right now, and they're not small companies, okay? But if shady people said, you need to sign this or we're going to take legal action against you, is that mostly an empty threat if they're not giving you anything in compensation for that signage?
That is an extremely empty threat. There's essentially nothing they can do to you.
I wish I would have found you like a year ago, because so many of my friends have been screwed by that. Oh,
I cannot emphasize this too much. And again, if you only take one thing away from listening to this, take this away from it. Never sign something that HR gives you on that day. Always take it home with you. Always say you have to look at it. Always say you got to talk to your spouse about it. But never, ever just get bounced into signing something that you don't understand, because then you're stuck with it.
Let's say I got a contract. There was some bits that gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I wanted to, say, get counsel on it. Like, I know lawyers have a wide range of rates, but is this kind of a 3-figure problem or a 4-figure problem to get a counsel to look at your contract and advise you?
I would say it's probably a very low 4-figure problem. You're looking at maybe $800 to $1,200 in range of getting a lawyer to look at it, to advise you, who knows about the industry. I think that's money that's absolutely well spent, because, again, we have all seen the horror stories of people who are working at Uber because they've been blocked from working in another job for 2 years because they didn't read the original contract they signed. Having a lawyer look at this sort of contract is a form of insurance. It's no different than paying your car insurance, than paying your medical insurance. You want to be protected when something happens, and getting a lawyer just to read the contract, to give you some ideas, to give you counsel, is often the best $1,000 you can ever spend in a situation like this, because you don't want to get 2 years down the road, you have a falling out with the company, and suddenly you actually read the non-compete clause that you signed without recognizing its significance, and it bans you from working for 24 months. How is this? Is it good?
This is awesome. This is so good. Like, this is going to make me a lot of friends and a few enemies, which is exactly the way I like it.
I've worked with people in the tech industry before doing exactly this,
mm-hmm.
and I'm shocked at what people don't know they can do.
Techies are kind of focused, right, on very specific types of problems. Oh, man, it's kind of one of those things, right? It's just, I'll get a lawyer if I need a lawyer, but then they don't know they need a lawyer.
Exactly.
And then, or even if they did, then they're like, oh, what could I research myself because I'm super smart? And so they just don't get exposure to, here's some easy problems you can solve.
And another problem I've seen, especially with people who try to do it themselves, is they don't know what they're looking for. They'll concentrate on a provision which actually isn't important, and then they'll overlook 3 things that are vitally important, and they don't even realize it. And it's the same with any specialty.
Right. If you're a ServiceNow resource and you're like, gosh, I'm making $90 an hour, and it could take you 10 hours to figure out all the legal stuff you need to fight it or to inform yourself, like, you've basically spent $900. You could gain that time back, keep it billable, and just pay somebody to do that analysis for you.
A professional to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. All right, so since we're on this side of the rink, I get, for layman's, there's this fear that to go to court, I could be like putting myself in the poorhouse just to show that I'm right. Is there any kind of rule of thumb that might help somebody decide, okay, this needs to go to court, I need to fight this? And what are they in for if they decide to fight it? Going
to court in a non-compete context is almost always going to be a loser. And the reason for that is that even the terrible non-competes that I've seen that people have signed, even the worst ones are for 2, 3, 4 years. And you can speak from your own experience on this. Mm-hmm. Anytime you're doing a civil action in a federal or state court in this country, it's going to take anywhere between 1 and 2 years to be resolved. Especially when you're attempting to fight a non-compete against a major corporation, it doesn't matter if legally they are 100% wrong. They have expensive lawyers who will try to make you look bad, especially for people who are trying to do this without their own legal counsel. If you get a lawyer, it will take a minimum of 1 year in order to do the motion practice, in order to deal with all the deadlines, to file the right complaint. It's likely to cost thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars. And at the end, say after 18 months, you get a court order saying, yes, this non-compete is invalid. Well, what have you been doing the last 18 months? You've been fighting the company that wanted to hire you. They probably don't want to get involved. It's a huge issue for them because they need someone to do your job, but you're not able to do your job.
So an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure for sure.
Absolutely. I will go back to one thing in terms of what you should negotiate.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other things that you can absolutely negotiate is what projects you'll be working on, who you'll be working with. You can absolutely negotiate the conditions under which you can leave, because that's not at all clear in most contracts. You can define what one of your competitors is, even if there is a non-compete clause. And if you're in demand in an industry like the tech industry, you should negotiate every single last thing you do. If something was ever an issue in a previous job, and let's be honest, we've all had issues in previous jobs and we all know what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes they were our fault, and that's life. You learn and you move on and you try to grow. But a lot of the times they're the fault of your employer. For whatever reason, they were making your life more difficult. Always negotiate what makes your life easier at work.
Can you give us an example of conditions when you can leave? I've never heard of that before.
Say you have a 2-year contract and it's very obvious that it's not working out for whatever reason. Maybe you don't like it. Maybe they don't like you. This happens. If you have say a 2-year contract, it can be difficult just to walk out. You don't necessarily want to get fired,
Mm-hmm.
but you can put a provision in there to say, hey, if this isn't working for whatever reason, there's no reason to assign blame in these cases either, because often stuff happens. That'll make it easier for everyone to walk away in a clean split.
All right, so we are approaching time. I'm just going to do a quick review for my listeners. So we talked at the start about non-competes and the 3 non-compete factors you have to watch out for: duration, geography, and specific competitors. Kevin, I can quote you on the typical duration is 6 months. And the typical geography is...
Say 50 miles. I mean, that's a little bit more fungible with the tech industry, but I mean, that's still a good rule of thumb.
Part and parcel of this is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So read that very carefully, and if it gives you the heebie-jeebies even a little bit, talk to your lawyer. Don't sign it right there, and negotiate. And then we talked about all the things you can negotiate. We could negotiate everything. If you're looking at a non-compete, make sure you negotiate a severance package, because somebody's basically telling you, when you're done with us, don't work for a year. Negotiate your ideas and your solutions and your intellectual property. Kevin taught me very clearly that you can negotiate what kind of projects you can work on and conditions where you can leave. We also talked about HR is not the same as the legal department, and also HR is not on your side. They're on the company's side you're entering a relationship with. And then never, ever sign something the same day as HR gives it to you.
That's excellent. That's everything. That's all the points I wanted to hit.
All right. Thanks so much for watching, everybody. Again, Kevin's information is going to be down in the description below, so please check his business out if you need any legal assistance. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, man. I really appreciate it.
No, thanks for having me on.
If you'd like to sponsor this channel's content, email me at the address pictured here. If you need a conversation on where your ServiceNow implementation is or where it's going, you can reach me on Super Peers and book a short consult. If you want to contribute to high quality, high frequency output, consider a donation. If not, I still appreciate your viewership. Consider hitting the like button and sharing within your network. Thanks for watching.